Around the same time that I moved to Brisbane, a guy called Hugh Durrant-White came to the University of Sydney from Oxford, and Hugh's got a big background in robot navigation, and he was particularly interested in applying that to what's called field robotics. So these are robots that move outdoors. And he had some background certainly in automating big machines at container ports, and he was very interested in automating mines as well. So some of the projects that we did were in conjunction with the Centre for Field Robotics that Hugh had established at the University of Sydney. So when Hugh came out, he brought some PhD students with him. One of those PhD students, Paul Newman, someone that I've gotten to know quite well over time. Paul worked did his PhD at Sydney, then he went back via MIT back to Oxford, where he now leads a very big robotics lab in his own right and has a spin-off company called Oxbotica. Over time, there's been quite a flux of people moving between Oxford University and Oxbotica and here at QUT. So while I was working on these very applications-oriented projects in the mining sector, I was contacted pretty much out of the blue by a guy called Greg Hager. And Greg had been at the lab at the University of Pennsylvania. He'd finished his PhD there, and we overlapped by hardly any time at all. So he was leaving as I was arriving, but his interest was in vision-based control also. So he contacted me out of the blue in '96. He was interested in writing a paper with another colleague, a guy called Seth Hutchinson. I'd never met Seth. We were going to write the definitive tutorial on this topic called visual servoing. So it was a special edition of a journal. We were going to write the lead article, which is everything you need to know about visual servoing. And so this was done completely remotely and electronically. So they'd sort of flick the files to me, and I'd do some work on them and flick it back to them. So the files just went round and round the world. It was quite an intense period of time. I think Greg had a baby born during that particular project, and it was intense. But the article was published I think it was published in '96, so maybe we were working on it early '96, '95. Turned out to be enormously successful. That was my most highly cited paper ever by a long way. So it just hit the spot at the time, and the notation that we laid out, the way you think about the problem, the taxonomy of the problem space, that still stands. I think the paper was successful just because of the timing. It was now possible with computers as they existed in the '90s to process data from cameras in real time, where a decade before you needed to build special chips and special boards. Now a regular computer you could buy from the shop was just starting to be able to process visual data directly. So it put the capability in the hands of almost everybody. What the paper did was provide the theory that sort of guided you in how you should do that.